Yes.
Okay, so thank you all for actually coming to this special workshop, because this is also the very first year that VSSR would like to offer a skills workshop, because we realized that after 2 years of running the Vietnam Summer School in Research, we have met a lot of potential young researchers who are actually who can think critically but have a little bit of trouble with how to put into words and also how to tailor their normal writing into like academic formats. So we are very honored today to have Dr. Carolina Alves, also a good friend for a long time. So thanks to this workshop, I have the opportunity to meet up virtually with Carolina. So just a few words about Carolina. She is a Joan Robinson Fellow in Heterodox Economics at Girton College, University of Cambridge. So it's a very prestigious position. So congratulations to Carolina. And she holds a PhD in economics from SOAS, University of London. She's also a very active heterodox economist. She's part of Cambridge Social Ontology Group and the Alternative Approaches to Economic Research Group at the University of Cambridge. And if you are alumni of VSSR, also joining me this year in my course in Economic Evaluations of Public Policy, you're aware that I credit Carolina for her work because of her summer course, right, in public economy that actually inspired me to do this, to change also my curriculum for last year and so this year. She is a core editor of Developing Economics blog, so I highly encourage you to go on to the blog and read lots of interesting blogs by young and also more experienced senior economists who will take on a critical and pluralist approach to development economics. And it's also my honor to have Carolina as a co-founders of Diversifying and Decolonizing Economics at DCORN. And we have a Facebook page, so on Twitter, very active on Twitter as well, and also a website if you're interested in joining the network of economists who aim to promote inclusiveness in economics. She's currently sits on the Rebuilding Macroeconomics Advisory Board and the Progressive Economy Forum Council. So she's a very busy person. And, you know, we had a bit of chat before the start of this workshop. She doesn't normally accept any invitations to go to conference, but she accepts this invitation. So thank you so much, Carolina. And I would like to just to give you a heads up that we hope that this workshop is going to help you, but we also would like you to interact, right? To raise your questions. You can actually use the Zoom functions to raise your hands if you have questions. You can also send it via chat if you have questions, and or you know, via if you raise your hands and Carolina can stop and answer your question along the way. So we hope that if you feel comfortable turning on your camera to show faces, you know, show a warm welcome to Carolina, that would be great. Just to ensure that everybody could have consistent connections, right, to listen to Carolina fully, then we would like you to mute, but you are welcome to share your screen. Right, so I would like to hand over to Carolina to start the workshop.
Thank you, Jenny. That was a lovely introduction. I will start sharing my screen first. Then, so let's just do that. Here we go. So just confirm that everything's fine. Is it working? Yeah, great. So again, Jenny, that was a lovely introduction. And if I don't know how many of you here would like to follow an academic career, but that happens when you have your summer. Right now in the UK is the summer, no teaching is when you do your research. So that's why I said to Jenny, trying to avoid to accept invitations during this period, because exactly because I have to do a lot of academic writing. But I think the reason why that I felt inclined to accept that is because over the years when teaching, and of course grading essays and helping PhD students and master students, I realize what Jenny has just mentioned, how some of us, we get to mid of undergrad or even master, and we still are struggling to write. And so I've been teaching now for 10 years, and I started actually reading about how I could teach my students to write better. So when I saw that invitation, I thought that's perfect. It's the first time I can put everything together that I've been sharing it for my all students, and actually trying to really make that very effective. And so in that point is what I would like you guys to interact with me, because another thing that I realized over the years is that writing is very personal. It's such an intimate thing. You know, there are different ways to write, and they're very, very personal. So I need you to ask me questions to show your difficulties, because of course there are general rules we can discuss here, and that's what I'm going to try to do. And they are helpful because I have experienced my students, a great improvement when I do advise them following some of the discussions we're going to have today. However, by the end of the day, is, as I said, is personal. So you need to share, you need to tell me what's happening, and also for that to be more interactive. So okay, so this so I'm going to start actually. Oops, here we go. I'd like to start with let's see. Okay. I want to give all of you what I usually say to my students, and I call it a secret advice. The reason for that is because, as I mentioned before, it's very difficult to have a set of rules that will work for everybody, right? But there's something that I think very often does work for everybody. And so yeah, I would like to share that. It is about writing and what we should do when we are writing. But before I give that secret advice, I would like to give you guys 1 minute to think what actually would be a fantastic advice you'd give to someone at the graduate level, undergraduate level, or even a PhD level, because that advice is for these 3 stages. And what actually you'd tell that student, and you can share with me, or you can think just by yourself. You can share the chat with your colleague, but I'll give you 1 minute to think, and please feel free to say something if you feel comfortable. Oops, gave away the first advice. So, okay, I hope no one saw it when I wrongly pressed the key. So the first, I hope you guys had a little bit of time to think. I'm trying to work my chat without actually start presenting, but I couldn't do it that way. So if someone adds something to the chat, I'm sorry, I couldn't read. So, okay, so the first thing that's very important when you start writing, or when you have already written something, is to rewrite. This is the rule number 1. You're never gonna get something done, or a good piece of work done, in your first draft. It is impossible. It doesn't matter how much time you're going to spend reading, how good you are how fast you read, how good you are at interpreting ideas. It doesn't work that way. You're going to have to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And that's not my advice. It's something that I learned with Deidre and Max Closday. that is a very famous Chicago economist, and I'm going to give this reference for you guys to read at the end of this lecture, because everybody should read her advice when it comes to writing in economics. But that's one thing she goes on and on and on about. We have to rewrite, okay? And keep that in mind, and don't feel tired, and don't feel defeated when you kind of have 3-4 times you wrote the same thing, and you feel, oh my gosh, I can't do that anymore. No, you can, and that's the right path to do it. And that bit of advice comes together, the possibility of sharing what you have been writing. It's something that we, as I said, writing is very personal, and we don't like to share. We are very often very shy, very ashamed of our ideas. We don't think it's good enough. But the thing is, if we don't share, we'll never know how good it is and how weak it is. So I do understand that students sometimes, and even grown-up academics, they don't like to share their paper or their essay. So if you are like this, there are different ones. There are ones that they write a few things and then already have on the internet and they're just waiting for the feedback. But many of us, we don't like to go that route. So I advise you guys to share with friends, right? And share with friends and tell your friends that you want them to be, harsh. You want them to be tough, to really point out all the weaknesses in your paper, in your essay. Because again, this is another advice from Dreyde. She'd say it's better to be criticized by friends than in public. So these two things go together. Keep rewriting and keep getting advice from your friends. So this is the first secret advice. The second one is, you have to, I know sometimes we have lots to say and our mind is just with so many things in your, we have read all this, 10, 20 papers and want to bring everything together. But again, you're not gonna get a good paper if you're trying to put forward more than 1 or 2 ideas. And that advice is from John Cochrane. That's a very famous, again, Chicago economist. That was a coincidence. I don't know why I have 2 Chicago economists giving us advice today. Yeah, so his point is that if you should have one central contribution, of course, very often has to be original, and that's it. And actually in academia, if you want to follow the academic path, it's actually even more important to stick to this one contribution, because you're gonna suffer the pressure of keep publishing, right? So if you have 2, 3, 4, 5 very good contributions, split them in 4 papers, because strategically that will help you to get a job, will help you to get promoted. If you put everything in one paper, it's very unlikely to get published in the first place. If you get published, because it's too many things, not gonna get published in a top journal. So, you're gonna actually probably lose many of these very interesting contributions you may have. So this is is my secret advice. They don't actually say, they don't call this the secret advice. I do, because I think it's a device that it does fit for everybody, regardless your level. Keep that in mind. So, okay, so with that device out of the way, there's something observation I would like to make before we really get into our discussion. And, in a way, we should probably have, that's idea for next year, Jenny. We probably should have workshops and lectures on these 2 types of skills I will talk about now. But I will just mention, and is observation, because if you don't have these 2 skills, you're not going to write well. So I'm going through this workshop or this lecture, assuming that all of you have these 2 types of skills I will go through now. Okay, so the first of them is, study skills. And I'm sure if you guys are already in university, you know what that is, but I will come back to this. But keep thinking what actually I mean by study skills. The other one, thinking skills, okay? So you need to have these skills to write well. The first one is something that I'm sure you're all familiar here, right? Reading, obviously, note-taking, writing, organization, and revision. Okay, if you don't do that well, you're not going to write well. Okay, and I'm not saying that the study skills come first. All this comes together, and you don't do this kind of skills in an isolated way. But I'm just breaking it down for you to be sure, or to be able to spot where your weakness is, right? So if you have some problem with reading, not taking, writing, organization, and revision, you're gonna have to cover that to write well. Okay. The other point is, oh, here we go, thinking skills, which is analyze what you have read, synthesize what you have read, discuss, know how to argue, have your argument, and know how to use evidence. Okay, so you need to have all of this to write a good paper, to write a good essay, to write a good master dissertation, and to write a good PhD thesis. Now, the reason why I'm being very, I'm emphasizing that you need that is because it's not impossible to have this, okay? If you dedicate a little bit of your time to improve these skills, you can get it. This is not impossible. It's about training, it's about reading what it is, it's about forcing yourself. For example, if you're not good at note-taking, you force yourself a little bit of doing that more often. If you don't like to organize your notes, you start forcing you to do that. So things that if you practice, you'll be able to do it, right? We're not born with these abilities, but we can unlock them if we start learning them. So as I said before, you could probably have an entire lecture on study skills, an entire lecture on thinking skills. I'm kind of assuming this is somehow in the background, but I want to make that observation, because if it's not, you should go through this before expecting yourself to write a fantastic paper. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And please feel free to ask me questions if I'm going too fast as well. Okay, so with my secret advice out of the way and this observation out of the way, I will now talk about 3 aspects, 3 points, which I think are important, or we need to know when we are trying to deliver a good academic paper. The first one, which is something that no one told me when I was starting my undergrad, and now I make sure I tell my students this, because it sounds very silly, right? Why we are writing an essay in the first place? Okay, we never ask our question. I mean, we get into our undergrad, even here in the UK, 6th form students, they have to start writing an essay. It's crazy when they're applying for university. By the time they get in, depending on your subject, you're gonna write 2 essays a week. And I realized that it makes sense to tell these students why you write in the first place, because as we know, there are subjects where they're not essay-based, and students are still learning. So why our subject is that kind of subject that we need to write? We need to write essays, and so I think it's important for us to understand that, because then you feel more confident about writing papers, because you know you need. So the point here is, and that's not a mystery in a way, there are 2 reasons why we write papers in our subject. And I'm assuming here the majority of the audiences are doing either economics or any kind of social sciences. So this is a device, it goes for most of the social sciences subject. So the first reason is more general and philosophical, okay? Oops, here we go, what I've done, here you go. But still very important. What happened here is when, as economists or as a social scientist, what we want is to try to understand what's happening in the world, right? What's happening out there. We need to try to understand, okay, what's the function of some objects, what's our function, what's happening here. And in order to do that, we have to exchange ideas. We have to try to find out more about the mechanisms behind things we want to understand. And when we do that, the only way we can actually absorb all this information and learn about is if we actually write something. Oh, sorry, The other, let me just hold there. So just to go through the two reasons, one general, one philosophical, and the other one's more practical. I'm going to come back to the practical later on. I'm right now talking about the general and philosophical. So let's go back to the general and philosophical. So here's what I was saying before, right? We need to understand what's out there. And in order to do that, right, we have to write. There is no way out. If you think you're going to understand the world just reading a book, it doesn't work. Our mind doesn't work that way, okay? There are many, many philosophers that came before us that already made that clear. Right is the form of thinking, is the most difficult one, but is the most effective one to learn. Because every time we are writing something and we are exchanging these ideas with others, we are actually finding out what is strong, what is weak about our interpretation of the word. We are testing the evidence we came across. We are testing if what we read is compelling, if it makes sense. So there's no way out. In our subject, there's no way out. You're not going to be a good economist or social scientist if you don't write. Okay, so you have to write academic papers, you have to write essays. There's an observation here I would like to make, because especially now in times of fake news, Twitter, and everything, right? That everybody has opinion in life. Everybody has something to say about something. That is not valid for you. Okay, if you're doing an academic paper, it's not about your opinion. It's not about what we think is fine, okay? Because this is just a discussion, okay? What we see on Twitter, on social media, sometimes on the TV and so on, is a discussion rather than a debate. You should do a debate in your paper. What that means? It means that when you're discussing something on social media, when you're discussing something with your family, with your friend, what you want there, you want to win the argument, okay? So it's like if you're selling your own ideas. So you're not gonna use all the evidence you have. You're gonna hide some of the evidence that contests what you're saying, that show that what you're saying is weak. You're gonna probably try to not give much attention to logic. You're not gonna give much attention to someone saying something different than you, because you're just discussing, you want to win. That's not what we do in academic essay. In academic essay, you are debating ideas, you're going through a process that goes back to Socrates, which we call critical thinking. And I'm sure that critical thinking is something that many of you came across before. You need to go through the arguments, you need to think about them, you need to be sure that the argument is sound, you need to be sure that there is evidence to support that argument, you need to recognize two sides of the argument. So it's not what we do on Twitter or Facebook or online or with your family. Academic essay is about critical thinking, is about a debate, is about to make your ideas stronger. And if there is any weakness in your idea, it's good for you, because then you can cover, you can change, you can improve, okay? So that is what's behind this general and philosophical aspect of writing a paper. Again, I keep going to the wrong one. Another point I like to highlight here that's very important as well in our process of why we're writing this paper and academic papers, is that you're not competing. When you're discussing with your friends, you're competing. Who's going to win this argument? In an academic paper, you're not competing with anyone. You want to get as close as possible of the truth about things. You want to have an accurate view of the world. So in order to do that, you need to share. Is a cooperative process, not a competition. So you have to, again, there is a sharing process with your friends. There is an aspect of being honest about what you're reading. Sometimes you probably agree with that, but you can see the argument is weak. So be honest and open up and go and read something else. Again, critical thinking is important here. So, you're trying to get an accurate view of the world, and you have to be honest about that. And sometimes that's going to challenge your own belief, and that's fine. You shouldn't be afraid of that. What you cannot do it, especially in our current historical moment, is to engage in that wave of fake news and dispute of arguments that have no base. Someone going through a process of writing academic paper should move away from that. The other aspect, the other reason why you should write is more practical in a way. And here we go again. Let me see. I'll just change the slide. So what I mean here, if it is more practical, is literally, and it goes back to the point of how we cannot get away from writing in our field. What we need here, basically, we need to develop our cognitive abilities, okay? Which goes back to the study skills, to the thinking skills. And the only way you can develop them is if you write, if you analyze concepts, if you synthesize ideas, if you evaluate, again, arguments and evidence. So you need to do that. It's the only way. It's the same thing. There are some authors that they give the example of when you want to play a sport. I think you want to play, I don't know, tennis, right? You have to practice. If you don't practice, you're not going to get good at playing tennis. It's the same thing with essays, and the same thing with knowledge, with being good at writing and expressing your ideas. The more you write, the good you become when it comes to your reasoning, when it comes to organizing your ideas. No one is like, oh, that person is extremely clever, is done. No, you have to practice. And that's why it is very important, again, to write essays. I have academic papers. I have one observation here, which I have somehow say something about that already, which is you have to write because you have to organize your thinking. And that's the way to do that, is putting your ideas on the paper. But I think I somehow had mentioned that before. Okay, so this is my first point regarding, so just to do a recap here. I gave you some secret advice to why we need to, why writing is how you can actually have a good, achieve a good writing. Then I mentioned some aspects regarding the, oh, here you go, regarding the, actually, I myself forgot here, let me just go back, sorry. Just go back here so we don't, here you go. Then I gave you guys some observations about the skills you should have. Then I get to the first point, which is important for us to, again, achieve a good academic paper, which is to know why we are writing. So I went through here 2 reasons why writing a paper is necessary for our field. And now I'm going to go to the second point regarding how to write good academic papers. And the second point is, writing academic paper is not a soap opera, right? And it's not a novel. What I mean here, what I'm trying, is someone asking me a question? Should I, no? No, okay. So what I'm trying to say here is that academic writing is not about a film you start watching and you're just gonna find out who is the hero, who is the murderer at the end, right? Or a soap opera where everything is just the last episode where you find out about, you know, who was the father of whoever, who was, you know, that messy situation that goes for 6 months, and the last day, the last episode is when you find out about everything. That's not how academic writing works. If you're trying to do that, you're not going to be able to get a publication in a good journal, and you're not going to write a good thesis or a good master dissertation. And that is very important, actually, because this goes a little bit of, there is a cultural aspect here that you have to be very aware if you're writing in English, but your language is a different language. Because, for example, I'm Brazilian, and my language, my native language is Portuguese. In Portuguese, we do, when you write in academia, we do have some introduction that's long, that we go on, almost like a soap opera, right? But that we have, if you want to publish in journals that are English, are written in English, or you're gonna give you more reputation because of that, you have to be aware that in English, you start with your punchline. And very much writing around the world is adapting to that, which is a shame for those who, for the first language not English, because it's a struggle for us, because it's not just about learning the language itself, it's the style. You know, we have to change. So there's a cultural aspect here that you have to be very aware how it works for your own culture, because then if more aware you are of that, the less you struggle, the less you're going to think, oh, I can't write well, because you're going to know that there are some gaps, that are cultural gaps as well. So that's very important for those who are not writing their first language. So here we go. So yeah, you need that punchline straight away. You need to make very clear what your contribution is, okay? This is not a joke, it's not a mystery novel. No one wants to wait. You're gonna, if you, the reader, right, the editor who is going to be about publishing your paper, your supervisor, they're not gonna keep reading everything just to find out who was the villain in the end. They want to know right away, right? So the fluff about your story is gonna come afterwards. Make sure you start with that punchline, we call punchline, you know, the contribution. And that is actually very, very important. I learned that in a hard way after many rejections where, you know, what's happening here. And I trying to make that clear to my students when they started writing their essays in their first year undergrad. You know, unfortunately, that's how it works. And that goes as well for presentations. I mean, sometimes you can see students presenting their, you know, topic in a certain discipline, and they go on and on and on, and just in the last slide they come with the most important aspect of that presentation. It doesn't work, you know, even presentation works that way. So yeah, so a good paper basically doesn't keep going on, you know, explaining the traveling, the process, where did you go? We don't care. To be very brutal, we don't care. We don't care about how many books you read. We don't care how difficult it was for you. I know that's hard. It hurts. As I said, writing is very personal, but unfortunately, editors, they don't care. They want to know what your contribution is. Okay, so going to the third point I want to make about good academic writings, right, is actually this third point is a set of 3 rules or 3 tips I want to share. So the first one is, obviously, you have to keep your writing short, okay? You're going to read a lot. If you're doing a good work, we're probably going to read half of the National Library, whatever you are, but you're not going to use 10% of it. But you need to be aware of all this. So you have to control yourself to kind of find out, to kind of work it out what is important for your paper. And we're going to go through this in more detail. The second point, and that I agree that's a little bit more difficult. You have to know what your contribution is. And that goes back actually to the other slides, right? To how you make a paper clear. So I have this rule here, I always share with my students, you know, make sure you know why, like this X, like why X is important, okay? In what context X is important, and why X is original. X is your contribution, you know. Ask this, I mean, I started doing that for my students, and it does work. So when you have this like idea, you're not sure about what's going on, you're not sure how you're going to write about, ask this little question for you. Why X is important? In what context it's important? Why, what is original about X? So you have to have that very clear, because if it's clear for you, you're going to be able to have a much nicer paper where you're going to really throw away everything that's fat, everything that's extra. And then the editor is going to know that you really have a specific contribution to add to that specific field. So yeah, and together with that, it comes the idea of be aware of how this X is important in a broad literature as well. So all this, it comes together. And of course, the last one is something I also adapt recently to say to my students, you know, be clear about your contribution. Say once, say twice, say 3, 4, 5 times. Don't let the reader get to the middle of your paper not knowing why this person is writing that. So say an abstract, say in your introduction, say in the main body of your paper. It's not the repetition itself, because repetition is not good, but you have to make very clear what you're going to say in that essay. So you make that clear. You say once, and you say twice if it's necessary, and you say 3 times if it's necessary. Basically, what I'm saying is your contribution needs to be stated over and over and over again. So the editor, the referee, who is reading your paper, your supervisor, they know what you're doing. Let them decide if you're repeating too much. They're gonna tell you, okay, there's too much repetition here. But just in case, put it there as many times as you can. Okay, so this is my 3 kind of general points regarding academic writing. What I say for, let's say, a second part of this lecture is to go through what would be a structure of a paper. And I hope that can be somehow useful. I don't know how many of you are already in the stage of writing papers, how many of you are writing essays or a PhD thesis or a master thesis, but I try to put a structure together that cover these 3 stages. You work for essay, you work for master thesis and for PhD thesis and academic paper. With some kind of little tweaks, but overall is that the structure you need. So we have time. I will go through this 7 kind of stage of a paper, sorry, 6. And to make sure we can have an overall idea of which kind of effort, which kind of skills you need for each of that aspect of the paper. And yeah, so you stop me if you have any questions on that as well. So any questions so far before we move to the paper structure? Is it working? Is everybody with me?
Can I just have one question? I find that from the students, when you say, what is your contribution, could you clarify, or give an example? Because it seems, many students could feel like, I don't know whether what I'm writing is actually a contribution or if there's anything novel about it. So how do they know?
Yeah, that's a very important question. To be very honest, this contribution can be divided in different ways, not necessarily something that's original that no one has never ever thought about it, right? It can be, for example, if you're writing an essay, of course, this contribution will be very much linked to what is the question of that essay. And sometimes can be a essay question that is discuss that statement, which then it doesn't really imply you're going to have a contribution, but you're going to be able to discuss that statement with both sides of the interpretation of a specific statement. And then the contribution would be your ability to bring these both sides together and answer that question in a way. Okay, for example, one of the first questions I give to my students here when they're doing economics and politics is related to the role of institutions and if politics should be removed away from economics, right? So economics should be this very hard science, just math and etc. And I get a statement from Buchanan that Buchanan was a economist in the 60s who is going to be responsible for this public choice revolution in economics, where there's this the quantitative aspect comes into some of the public sector discussion. But anyway, so I want them to. So I gave the Buchanan statement that I'm going to remember. I don't remember now, but it's basically a statement saying politics should be separate from economics. And then I ask my student discuss, right? So they can agree, they can disagree, or they can contextualize that statement. There are two interpretations of that. So the contribution I'm looking for there is my students' ability to show me that there are two different views in that idea of separating economics from politics. And I want them to make sure to convince me they know these two different approaches to economics. And then they're going to get brownie points, extra points, if they also give their opinion. But again, opinion is not about, oh, I think that. Your opinion should be based on the arguments you offer in that essay. So if the student come based on the literature, I agree with Jenny that the state should play an important role there. That's brownie point. So the contribution was, you grasp that is a polemical topic, there are two different views, and then you add where you stand in that debate. Where is your position in that debate? That's amazing. So that would be more essay level. Of course, a master thesis, a PhD thesis, the contribution would be based on the answer you set for yourself. It can be, a set of 3 or 4 hypotheses you're testing, you're running a model that is different or adding something else to a different model, so to a general model. So you have then based on what you set for yourself as a hypothesis, then the contribution would be your ability to test that hypothesis and confirm or not. Don't be afraid of having a hypothesis that's you're not going to be able to prove as well, because that is still a finding, is still important. So it varies. There are cases when you get to a level where you're publishing papers, and as a grown-up academic, then the demand about being original is much broader, right? Because they will expect you to know the entire literature and field, because by then you did your master, you did your PhD, you're teaching. So for in that level, there's no excuse that I don't know what the literature in my field is, right? And then your contribution is about your 2 cents in that literature, right? So what you add to that, that's new. Then the original aspect of it is then much more, is clearer that it has to be original aspect, and you have to contribute, you have to add something. Does it make sense, Jenny? Great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, okay,
Hello?
Yeah.
Excuse me, can I have a question?
Yeah?
Yes. I think that before we start to write a paper or academic writings, we usually choose to find our concern or our problems in the society. So we start to write. So I can ask you a question is like that. So how can we find our, inspiration or our concern to start our writing?
So, okay, let me see if I understand. So your question is is the inspiration behind your writing, right? Is that?
Yes, yes.
Wow, that's a tough one. Look, this is going to be my advice that I use for myself, which is the beginning of every paper, the beginning of every inquiry, of every question you have, is very much based in intuition, right? I've never come across someone who had a initial thought that was very polished, or that had read some kind of a base behind it. Very often is intuition, especially in our field. Something we've been learning that we have a feeling that doesn't work the way, or some theory that you can see doesn't really apply for different country A, and then you start investigating. So very often this inspiration is a mix between curiosity and uncomfortable. You're uncomfortable about something you've been reading that you don't think is right. And to be very honest, every paper that I wrote that had the most amazing feedbacks were paper that actually I started that way. I was very upset with something that I don't think worked that way, and then I start investigating to find a better answer. So very often that is your drive. That's what makes you to write good papers, because or even do a good PhD. Like PhD is daunting, not gonna lie, it's tough. If you're gonna do that, it's gonna be hard. So if you don't have a topic that you're passionate, that you're curious about, you're not gonna survive. You're not gonna go through. So you need to have something that's, this inspiration you're looking for is based on your intuition, in your guts, something that it drives you very mad inside, in a good and sometimes in a bad way, and then you start investigating. So that's what I would say out of the top of my head. I'm gonna keep thinking. But yeah, and inspirations can be sometimes from different authors that we read, right? You read author that sometimes you agree with this author, like from, you know, completely, but then the inspiration is, oh, I want to use his ideas or her ideas to understand something else. So the inspiration can be some kind of similarity, some kind of chemistry with a theory, with a certain author that you feel very close to, that it matches your ideas, your beliefs, and then you start investigating. The key point is you have to be open, because when you rely on instinct or intuition or passion, you have to be ready to be confronted, to meet something that's challenged your own passion, your own inspiration, and you need to be open, otherwise you're not gonna end up with a good paper.
Yes.
Have I answered your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Great. So I think then, just to make sure, my time, I'm speaking to 3, is that?
You can go over a little bit if you want to.
Oh, I probably will have to. Yeah, I try to go quick so I have more time for question. Okay, so the structure of the papers, right? Let's start with, of course, abstract. I had to actually organize here to be a little bit slow because I wanted to interact a little bit more. But considering that we don't have much time, I'm gonna ask the question and respond myself. So the point here of abstract, one thing that I feel that sometimes students, they get a little bit confused is when they have to write the abstract. And the answer is this last thing you write. No one start a paper writing the abstract, right? Because you need to know what the paper is about it before you write the abstract, obviously. Another point here is abstract is no more, never long than 200 longer. Sorry, there's an ER missing there. Never longer than 200 words. And what you have to bear in mind in your abstract is a quick way to communicate your contribution. So again, it has to be the last thing you do because you need to be aware about your contribution, right? In your abstract, you again, it's not a soap opera. You're not going to go there and keep talking about what you want to find, how you found, what's happening here. You're just going to state your contribution. Don't mention literature, don't mention methods or any aspect related to that. So again, not a soap opera. So in a way, abstract is simple. If you have a good paper, you're not going to have a problem writing this abstract. Introduction is a little bit more complicated, and I think the introduction is where I'm gonna spend most of my time talking about the structure of a paper, because if you get the introduction right, that really open up, you know, you really get the reader's attention, the editor's attention, your supervisor's attention. So introduction is the most difficult part for students to write. And the reason I see, based on my experience with my students, the reason for that is because very often the students are not very clear about what an introduction is, okay? So I will start that talk saying about what is not an introduction. And I hope in that way I will be somehow help you guys to understand what then is an introduction and how I write it. So so then I'm gonna go, what is an introduction? So the first aspect here is when you start writing your essay, after you have your, you know, your inspiration, you're following your instinct, you have a question that's driving you. So you're gonna do a lot of reading, you're gonna synthesize this reading, you're gonna take notes, you're gonna think and think, you're gonna plan how you're gonna write that, and you're gonna have an outline. Sometimes in English, a back of envelope outline is fine. these three aspects, these three stages, whatever you want to call, this is not an introduction. And you need that before writing the essay. No one can write an essay or not even a PhD thesis without having a little bit of planning, a kind of, sometimes we call a skeleton, right? Just like picture yourself without the meat, without your hair, just like nothing there, just your skeleton. That's what the outline is, right? And that's not an introduction, and you need to have that before. So if you have that, if you've done your homework, you've done all your literature review, you have your planning, you're aware of the literature, your idea is fine, you're clear for your contribution, then you're going to start writing, right? So leave that, you're writing. So let's think that you have wrote your paper. Then you're going to write your introduction. The introduction is the last thing you write before your abstract. Students who start their essay, their thesis, their master of introduction, they get blocked. Because, why they get blocked, okay? Because if you need to read, to plan, to write the outline before to then carry on your academic paper, how we can write the introduction? The introduction is supposed to give an overview of your paper, right? Introduction is supposed to give a roadmap for the author to follow you. How you can do that if you don't have the paper yet? You can't. So many students, they keep staring at introduction for hours and they don't move forward because introduction is the last thing, right? So you can ask me, but Carolina, how do I write the paper? You write the outline, you do your outline, you do a planning, which is not an introduction, right? You can come back to this. So then what the introduction is, again, is about what you do in your paper. So by then you have done already. Is about your contribution, but now you're going to explain a little bit more what your contribution is about your motivation, to go back to the question about instinct and how do you start writing a paper. By this time, your initial instinct, your initial passion has been polished. You can explain your motivation in a much more scientific and academic way, and the introduction is where that would come, okay? And then you offer a roadmap to your reader of how you have written your paper. I look into B, I did experiment C, I run the model F, right? That's your last paragraph of a good introduction. Okay, I have a few tips here for introduction as well, very quickly. As I mentioned before, right? Just do it as the last step in your paper, otherwise you're going to get blocked. Introduction shouldn't be too long. Very often we have a rule, and I usually tell my students, master and PhD and undergraduate students, 10% of whatever the paper count of their essay is, or their master thesis, no more than that. Be very careful to avoid writing an introduction that just says about your conclusion, right? Oh, that's what my finding is. It's not about that. It's about your contribution, not about your finding. Yeah? And again, I'm repeating myself, start with your central contribution. Okay, we can come back to introduction later. Oh yeah, I forgot about that part here. Introduction, as I said, should be short, but also don't start introduction going too long, talking about, first of all, the entire literature you have read, or about your motivation. Never start introduction with that. You're going to start introduction with your central contribution. The first paragraph is the hardest because it's where you have to do that very well. Then you're going to talk about how you wrote your paper, your motivation, a little bit about literature, but you don't start with that. Okay, so that is what I have for a few tips here. I think I have one last point, which is introduction is so important for a paper. You guys have no idea how, if you write a good introduction, you're gonna get half of the editors with you willing to accept your paper. You're going to get the reader to feel like, I want to read that paper into the last word of it. So you need to deliver a very, very good introduction. It's not just, some students, they come to me, it's like, oh yeah, introduction, I'm gonna do that later. Yes, it's later, but it's not because it's secondary thing or because it's something that doesn't matter, right? So to keep that in mind. Okay, so next, literature review. That one is a bit tricky, right? Because we all have to do the literature review. To go back to the question of instinct, passion, why you're writing that, the first thing you're gonna do once you have this, that kind of amazing idea, you're gonna read about it. And you have to read as much as you can that topic, because as to go back what academic writing is about, two sides of the story, get a very accurate view of the words, so you need to read as much as you can. However, you may not use all of this for your paper, right? So in a way, literature review is one of the first things you do. And by the time you're gonna fit that in your paper, you have to be very careful where that will go. And there isn't agreement, to be very honest, at least in economics, it varies. Some authors, they would say that you can fit your literature review at the end of your introduction. Just put a little bit there, what the main authors are saying about that topic. Some others, they advise that you need a separate section just for literature review, okay? My view is the following. If you're gonna have that in the introduction, don't start with the literature. Obviously, you're gonna start with your contribution. But I think I have a more strong view regarding do a separate section, right? Because if you do a separate section, you help the reader to contextualize the debate you want to do, right? Because it's going to be difficult for the reader to follow your contribution, okay? So you need a separate section where you explain how your contribution fits in a range of literature. And make easy for the reader, make easier for the person to read, okay, this is the current affair of what that person is writing. And make sure that person is reading that already having idea of what your contribution is. So it varies. As I said, I advise a separate section on literature review. Another point here is, what is actually a good literature review? Well, obviously, hopefully you have read the entire National Library, but you're not gonna add all these papers in your literature review. There is I don't know if I agree 100% with this, but it's a good start. Stick to mention 2 to 3 papers that are very close to your own contribution. And again, trying to, if there is an author that inspired you, right? That is really someone you agree, give credit that person, to that author. Make sure that author is engaged with your own contribution, that because that's gonna make your literature review stronger. It's like if you're building up upon other kind of discoveries, other kind of knowledge that have been accumulated. And that's very good. It's something you should try to do. I think I have one last one here, which is be generous with your citations. What I mean here is, literature review is not about criticizing every single author that didn't do as well as you. You can of course criticize some authors, say, author B did similar to what I've done, but it didn't really touch that aspect. This is fine, but it's not about criticizing everyone, what everyone has done wrong. That's not interesting. Great, so that's it. Jenny, can I go for another 5 minutes?
Yeah, you go for it. I think there's a question for you. Do you wanna take
sure.
it? Yeah, so let me read it out to you, because in the chat from Daphne, say, should we mention about only papers that support our paper in the literature review?
Yeah, I mean, that would be my advice. If you have to choose, I mean, literature review is supposed to give a taste that you're familiar with that field, right? So you need to know papers that are criticizing whatever is your contribution. But I would say that more important than that is that you have you state the knowledge that have been accumulated before your own contribution, that you be clear about where you're coming from, why you're discussing that topic, what has been done before me, right? So it's more important, that aspect, make your foundation strong. Like, I have idea, but I've been building that idea in so many different authors here, because that makes your literature review much stronger, right? So there are topics where it's very important to mention, especially if it's a paper that causes a lot of impact, right? So you have to mention that there's paper B who criticized my finding, my contribution, however, I'm doing this in a different way. But very often, if there isn't a very seminal paper in your field that's contesting what you're arguing, I would focus on paper that are very close to your own contribution. Hope that answer. Yeah. Okay, so, okay. More?
Well, I think there's questions about citation, but this from Ho saying that there are many kinds of citations, like Harvard, Vancouver, APA, Oxford. Which one should we use in our paper?
Yeah, well, that depends on your university, on your department, and your personal taste. The most important thing with citations is, or reference style, is you have to be consistent. If you're doing Harvard, you're going to do Harvard for every single aspect of your paper: footnotes, in-text citation, reference, everything. You can't do in-text reference with Chicago style, then footnotes with the Harvard style. The most important bit for the style, the reference you're going to use, is consistency. The one you have to follow one. If it's Chicago, it's just Chicago. If it's Harvard, it's just Harvard. APA, just APA. The point is, there are some departments that they want a specific style. I want Harvard. Then you have to find out. But so if you are in your master thinking about a PhD, I don't know, in department P, have a look which kind of reference that department uses, and start using your master already. Because then, for example, I just use APA, and it gets us because it can be very tricky to remember all the rules, where the comma goes, is the surname comes first, you're gonna use, there's so many little different details. So the best thing is you stick to one and do for your entire life. Nowadays I can do APA without even think about it, because I've been doing it for 15 years. But if I have to submit, for recently I submit a paper for economic at LSE, and they wanted the Harvard style. That was hard because I'm just not used to that style. So the entire paper has to be changed. So you have to know, so there are two things to summarize, to sum up. One is, make sure what your institution wants. The second point is stick to one style and be consistent. Regarding to that, although that would be extra, one thing I found out during my master is to use a software called Zotero, but there are others of EndNote. There's so many different ones, which actually you can add all your readings there, and you can write your paper adding your references through like Zotero. So it's much easier because the entire software does the references for you. So have a look at Zotero or EndNote. And if you're not using that, I strongly advise you to start, because first of all, it saves time. Oh my gosh, it's literally is amazing. Second of all, is you have consistency, because if you open your Word document, right? So Zotero is gonna be an add-on there, and then at the end you say, okay, I'm gonna use Chicago here. So you don't need to change manually. The entire document goes in Chicago style, so there is no way to get some kind of inconsistency there. Okay, so main body of the paper. This is actually this is what this writing a paper is about. That's the most important part. So abstract is last thing, introduction is the last thing before the abstract, and then literature review, we have to do it because that's your research, and then you have to find out where you're gonna fit introduction or just one section. If that has been done well, that's very short. It's good to read, but short. It's just going to really direct the reader to this point, the main body of your paper. And I like John Cochrane rule here that he says there should be, let me just find my own because I can't read it properly there. Here we go. There should be nothing before the main result that a reader does not need to know in order to understand the main result, right? So here is where you're going to talk about your findings, okay? So everything that comes before here should be something that the reader needs to understand your main result, but nothing extra. So just very quickly, I just separate really two aspects of the body of the paper. The reason why I separate two aspects is because papers, you know, it varies. It can be a very theoretical paper, it can be an empirical paper. So I kind of separate in theory and empirical, but of course it can be both, or you can, most of the economic paper nowadays, they are empirical. So what do you need here? And I'm going to go very quickly, apologize for that, but if you have time, you can come back. If your contribution is theoretical, right, then you do need, of course, to talk about theory and explain your own theoretical finding contribution. However, if your paper is more empirical, then you have to keep your theory to the minimum. You just add what's necessary for you to understand the results. If you're dealing with model, if you're modeling, which in economics is very common, you describe your model. You don't describe general model. You don't describe every single model or the model you're following, then you're changed. Just go direct to your model. You know, don't put as I said, don't make the reader to sleep. Just go to what is key for you, because that is the main part of your paper. So in the case of the model, just describe the part of the models where the data would be plugged in. Don't go wild, because that doesn't reflect a good paper. If it's empirical, again, you need main results, the main findings. You do not describe, you know, the data, preliminary estimates. You don't really keep going toward that road, or if you don't really do extensive data description, you don't do that. You don't need, it goes through your appendices, but you don't come here, right? Another point you need here is empirical work. Oh, by the time you're in that aspect of your paper and you want to explain your empirical finding, you're gonna add graph, you're gonna add tables, and you do that trying to bring the reader, picture if you're holding the reader with you, right? And you want the reader to find out your main contribution with your findings now. So all this data, all this graph is about the reader. Keep the reader, thinking about the reader trying to climb a tree. And you need to give that reader support for keep going up. That is your graph, that's your table, nothing else. Don't keep adding every single table because you think it's cool. Doesn't work that way. And yeah, one thing that's important is to, if you're dealing with modeling again, or any kind of econometrics, you have to make sure you test if it's robust or not, but you're not gonna add everything here. Again, this is the extra bit that comes at the end of the paper, but you have to mention potential criticism and that you've done the robustness check. So make sure that's here, but the rest is appendix. And that's it. So sorry for being very running, because now the last part is conclusion, and that's very quick actually. So conclusion, again, some students, they do struggle with that a lot. Conclusion is supposed to be very, very easy. If you've done your introduction by now very well, you're good literature review, you know what's the main body of your paper. Conclusion supposed to be the easiest thing ever, because you're gonna really bring everything together, right? And if your introduction is well done, you're gonna literally follow some points of the introduction, explain how we reflected on that topic, on that point, that themes, and then give this punchline that in a way you have already mentioned in the main body of your paper. Now, this is the minimum you can do in your introduction. Is as I put here, tighten your paper up, you know, make everything very coherent. But you can add extra here. You can mention some implications in future trains. Some people, depending on the kind of paper you're doing, you can do that. You can bring some, indicate that your findings can help to solve problem B or C, or can contest the solution for these problems. But you have to be very careful here, because you shouldn't add in introduction anything extra that you haven't mentioned in your paper. The reader shouldn't find out anything new in a conclusion, okay? So when you're talking about future trains, be very careful to not add too much, okay? Because nothing in your conclusion should be new. Another aspect you can add in your conclusion is a criticism towards your own work. If you know that your work is very good, but there's one part, there is a limitation there, don't hide it. Put in your conclusion is fine. And this last advice I'm getting from John Cochrane again, that he said introduction should be short and sweet. It should be that amazing reading that, the editor, your friend, a person who is not from your field, you read, you feel like, wow, that's so interesting, that's so cool. But keep it short. Conclusions that are long are not good, okay? It's not going. Why can you go? Here you go. Is not, conclusions that are long are not interesting. Again, I mentioned that before, be very careful with opinions. It's not about your opinion, right? If you're gonna actually add something about your opinion, it has to be based on what you have already discussed. Don't just repeat your findings. That's very boring. Remember, short and sweet. I don't want anything bitter, boring. Don't repeat. It's not repetition. So short, keep short, as I said. Appendices, very quickly, if you're doing model regression, is where you're gonna dump everything here. Everything that I mentioned about, a different version of the model, all your exercises, testing, robustness, everything comes here. In your literature review that you read the entire National Library, but you knew you couldn't put anything there. But there's a paper that's very interesting. Like someone asked me if we should mention a paper that contests the papers that you're building upon. So perhaps you can add here some insightful aspect of the literature review you can add in your appendix as well. What else? And that's it, basically. I think this is all I had to say. Here there are two books and a paper I advise all of you to read. To be very honest, that presentation is very much based on these three books. I can't explain how they were helpful for me, especially the middle one I came across just doing my PhD, and I wish so much I had read that during my undergrad or my master. And economical writing from Deidre is a must read as well, will help so much. And then this one about tips for PhD students, I found out probably a year ago, 2 years ago, is very direct to PhD students, but I recommend because there are many tips there regarding it's more about the academic paper itself, which I discuss a lot here. So we can give you some advice for essays as well. And that's it, I guess. Now is the end. So thank you, and Jenny, it's up to you if you want. I'm happy to address some questions, and I'm very sorry for going over time.
Not a problem. I think there's it's just that I have to heads up. I have to hand it over to Guang to to take any questions, because I have to head over to the Decorn webinar right now. But there's but there are two questions here, so I just want to read it out, and then you can carry on with the discussions with the students here. So there's because you actually talk about the conclusion, there's one student, Truk, he or she asking about if the abstract is never longer than 200 words, do we have a constraint for conclusion?
Oh, yeah.
And from Dav, actually, she's asking, can you share some tips for limitation part in conclusion? So when you mention like the weakness of your paper, is there any tips of not really revealing your, you know, way too bad things about your paper? So, but I just want to say that it's really, really amazing. I took plenty of notes. I feel like I'm enlightened as much as the students enlightened too. Thank you, Karina. So please carry on with the workshops. I have to head over to other
Good luck
workshops.
for talking.
Thank you. Yeah,
Bye-bye.
I'll see you then. Bye.
Okay, so let me start with the conclusion. Sorry, because I had to go so quick here. I think I had something about the conclusion. Keep it short. I don't remember now. Look, the conclusion is different than the introduction that we reckon 10% of the entire paper. I've never really come across a specific size of conclusion. It's very clear that shouldn't be longer than a page. It shouldn't be too long. When I'm writing paper that the limit is 10,000 words, for example, I'd never go above 600 words. I would say if you're doing papers from 7 to 10,000 words, stick to 5 to 600 words. If you're doing essays around 2,000 words or 1,500 words, I would say one paragraph, like, I don't know, 10, 12 lines max. So yeah, I is literally, to be very honest, that author I mentioned, John Cochrane, he actually argues that if you write a very good introduction and a very good abstract, you don't even need conclusion. So you're gonna come across some papers that they don't have conclusion. I mean, editors, they don't like that much, but that's just to emphasize that a conclusion should be very easy, very short, because in a way you have done all the work already. So yeah, I would probably stick a good paper, 7 to 10,000 words, 600 words conclusion is the max you need. Okay, what's limitation? Wow, that's a difficult question. To be very honest, let me just go back to that, I think here. Yeah, I must say that I do avoid bring limitations to conclusion when I'm writing my own papers. It's not that I hide that. I try to add to my literature review, right? Literature review is not really about just adding many papers. It's about linking some papers with your own paper, right? With your own contribution. So when you're doing that, you can mention through some papers that either papers that have a different way to approach the topic than yours, or papers that use a different model, or papers that are already criticizing your findings, but you are thinking in a different way. If you have to add in a place, I would add there more than the conclusion. But if you decide to add that in the conclusion, it would be a quick mention, like it should be noted that author B has discussed that from a different aspect, and that impose a certain limit to that finding. But however, and then you make sure you argue that your paper is still very important. So yeah, let's say I think my advice would be avoid to do that, but don't hide it. Find a different place in your paper to add this. Does it make sense? Have I addressed your question?
Oh yes, thank you.
Yeah, one thing you can do actually, once you're addressing limitations, one way to bring that to the conclusion in a very cheeky and good and clever way is to bring the limitation in and suggest that goes beyond what your paper was discussing in a way, right? Because sometimes that happens. You have a very, as I said, what I said at the beginning, you have to really make sure you have one central contribution, very neat, very clear. And in order to do that, sometimes you have to exclude many other aspects. And in doing that, you end up actually having to avoid some of this criticism because they are falling in a different realm than your central contribution. So you can say that, look, there is this, that the paper has this limitation, but because we haven't addressed that, to decide just to focus in that aspect, this is a way as well to do it. And very often, actually, this is very true. Yeah? Do we have more questions?
Can I have a question?
Yes.
So in the case of like empirical studies, so those specification spec, like all the model, let's say the regression model and the result table, should it be included in the body part or should it be in the appendix?
You mean that there is, sorry, the model, the description of the model or the finding?
Yeah, the model defining and also the result table.
Yeah, no, the result table should be in that main body, right? I mean, the main body, you can actually have a short description of your model, right? And followed by the findings. You can actually add that your table, or what else you can add, your graph, your whatever you need to make very clear your findings. That actually should be in your main body. What shouldn't be there is the tests you do to check how robust it is, or the preparation for that model, because sometimes we are tweaking the models here and there, right? So we have a general model, and then we're gonna do a little bit different. So all this process of preparing, this preparation exercise, it shouldn't be there, because you're gonna lose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mean the justification part for the model?
No, the justification should be in the body of the paper. Because the thing is, in a way, because remember that I divide that, oops, let me just go back. Where does I go back here? Here you go. So if you go back here, you have theory and empirical work, right? Well, of course, if you're dealing with a model, right, part of the theory is a little bit the description of that model, the justification, describing it, and that should be there. You see, if you come, I don't know if you can see me here. If you look at that two parts, these 2 bullet points here, the only problem, or the only, not problem, but the only issue we have to be aware here is that you don't really go for too long explaining this. But definitely, I would say that justification would come here as a little bit of the theory you need to explain your model, and describing the model itself. Does it make sense?
Yes, thank you.
My pleasure.
Hello. So
Hello.
I want just a small question that about the appendix. So when I wrote my thesis, I based it on a very good essay. But yeah, to be honest, I cannot quote it in my thesis. So can you explain more about the appendix of that?
Yeah, I mean, the appendix is amazing in a way, because it's amazing too, in a sense that we can add everything we want. It's tempting to add everything we want there, right? Everything we didn't fit in our thesis, and I was like, oh, we're gonna add in appendices, and it shouldn't be the way either, right? It should be, of course, it's the extra bit, it's the fat of your paper that should go there, but it's still very much important for your paper. To be very honest, when it comes like this insight comments from the literature review, for example, or a general version of your model, or this robustness exercises, to be very honest, they tend to go to the appendix, and then by the time you get to be published, even you're gonna actually drop them out even from the appendices. It gets a point. You see, sometimes you're gonna come across papers that you do, they have a very short appendix, and then there is a footnote that you can find the full appendix in the web page of the author, and then that has like 100 pages, you know. So sometimes you can do that. You can have actually they do advise, especially the more American style, you're gonna find papers where the author will have the entire model or discussion or whatever the test in appendix that was not even published but is available in, you know, in a different platform. So of course is a great tool, but that doesn't mean you have to add everything there. Quite, you also need a selection process there.
Oh, yes.
And very often, if it's a paper, thesis is different, but if it's a paper that you're targeting a specific journal, sometimes the journal itself has some rules for the appendix anyway. So you're gonna know what can be there and what cannot be there.
Yes.
Does it help a little bit?
Yes, thank you. You made it very clear.
Good, thank you very much. Do you have more questions?
Hi, may I?
Hello?
Hi, may I have a question?
Yes, of course.
Okay. You mentioned at the beginning the importance of rewriting over and over again. But like, how do you make sure that the next time you write, your second draft is better than the first one, and then it's better than the second one, and so on?
Oh gosh, that's a tricky question. Yeah, I mean, to be
Sorry.
no, it's interesting because I'm still adapting to that, because very often when I get my third, fourth draft, I think, oh my gosh, I had so many good ideas in my first one, because sometimes it's to change completely. But I still, oops, here we go. I still trust that's the way to go, because the idea of keep rewriting is very much about polishing your own idea. And if when you're doing that, either because you have to read more, or because a colleague gave you a feedback and you need to add extra, or because a colleague said, well, there is already a discussion here, you know, you're not going to be original, not contributing directly. So as long as you're getting this kind of advice, that there is a justification to why you have to change your what you've been writing, right? Because it's not just someone who's going to come back to you and say, I don't like it. Doesn't make no. You have to get a feedback that's going to help, it's going to convince you that you need to improve that first draft or second draft. So sometimes it's very difficult to let it go, but I've never come across, even in my own experience and with my students, a situation where the first draft was ideal. What is very tricky sometimes, this, what I mentioned to another of your colleague, that passion, that instinct, that first drive that made you to go and research that, sometimes actually is very clear in your first draft, because it's what, you know, made you to write. So what you have to be aware is how you keep rewriting, right, without losing that first passion you have for the topic, that first question that somehow led you to start writing in the first place. I think this is the key, is how not to lose that instinct, that little curiosity, question, hypothesis that you had from the beginning. I think if you manage to keep that throughout this rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, I think you'll be fine. Does it help?
That's a great remark.
You let me know how it goes.
Yeah. Thank you.
My pleasure. Do we have more questions?
Oh, yeah. I have a quick question. Is that is there anything we need to bear in mind when it comes to lexical aspect? Like, what kind of vocabulary do we need to use or something?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and to be very honest, thank you for your question. And to be very honest, I didn't add here because it was already too long. But perhaps we can explore that in other lectures. Vocabulary is very important. I have students that they use you read their essays, and or even read the first draft of their master proposal or something, and it's like if they're having a pub conversation for their friends, right? It's like and academic writing shouldn't be about that. You have to be very careful for the choice of the words. Now, again, if you're not writing in your first language, it's difficult because you need to have this vocabulary. And the only way you can have that is reading. So for example, one thing that I do for myself, which was very hard, I've been in UK now for 10 years, but the beginning was very hard, was like avoid reading Portuguese, at least at the academic level, because if I keep reading Portuguese and writing English, I'm not gonna have the vocabulary I need, and my writing is much slower. So I start forcing myself, even if it was longer, you take longer, because of course you read in a different language, it take longer. So that's my experience as a foreigner in the UK. But of course, even in my own mother tongue, I would need to, I have to keep reading. And that reading is not just about sometimes some topics in our own, when I'm writing about, I don't know, inflation in Brazil. It's not just about reading papers that I talk about inflation. It's about reading novels, about reading other kind of book to get this vocabulary. Another thing that's very important, some students, they like to use a lot of adverbs, like inflation increased inflation had let me just think a different example. For example, inflation increased dramatically. You know, there are some kind of adjectives, adverbs such as dramatically, or let me think about even very, or I'm not thinking about any other one now. You have, I mean, academic writing is not about you don't make your point using adverbs that to exaggerate that point. Remember, it's not a discussion. If inflation was high, you're giving me the data, you're explaining to me. So you don't need to tell me that using an adverb. So of course you need to sometimes sharp, or a sharp drop in inflation, or a sharp drop in price. Of course, sometimes you need that adjective or even the adverb, but don't use it frequently. Academic writing, you don't use words to make your argument. You read it and you get the argument, you get the evidence. So you have to find a balance. Sometimes you're gonna read a paper that has, dramatically, sharp, a lot, very much. That doesn't look like a good academic writing. You have to find a balance here. Does it make sense? Sorry, I haven't prepared much on that. I'm just thinking out of the top of my head, but I hope it helped a little bit.
Yes, thank you. It does.
Great. Do we have more questions?
Oh, excuse me. Actually, I have one question in the chat box. So could you read it, please?
Yeah. Let's see if I. Oh gosh, sorry. I'm still learning how to do Zoom and presentation at the same time. Here you go. I think I have to go here, right? No. Gallery view.
Or I can read it for you.
Can you? Oh, here you go. I found it. Okay, good. Read, please.
Yeah. So one of my mistakes is that I often write something not really contributes to my thesis statement. So besides revising my writing, how can I prevent to explain on the point that not really concentrate on my thesis?
Yeah, well, this is another very good question. And this is something, the answer for that, and again, we could go on and prepare just a lecture on that, is what a literature review is about. I don't know how you have been taught how to do a literature review, but this is the most important part of your work, because the more you read, the more information you have about whatever is the topic you're writing, right? Your thesis or your paper, you have to read and get this idea of what is the current debate in that field, in that topic. So when you're reading a lot, you're not gonna really have explanation, you're not going to take notes of every single author you're writing, but you have to take notes of every single debate that's happening throughout that readings. And if you get that right, if you're aware, for example, if I don't know why I'm just talking about inflation, but I think that you're reading different authors explaining inflation in Brazil, for example, right? And I read 20 authors doing that. I'm not going to explain which each of these authors are saying, but I'm going to have probably 3 or 4 different approaches to inflation after reading that. And then I can fit these authors there. And once I have these 6, 7 different approaches to inflation in Brazil, which it kind of came out of my own literature review. Once I have that, then it's easy for me to see where my thesis statement would fit on that. Sometimes you fit in one of the 6 blocks, sometimes something different, so I have to keep writing and I have to talk to my supervisor, am I missing something, am I make sense? But the thing is, if you don't have this overview of whatever the topic you want to discuss, you're never gonna know where you fit in, and it's gonna be difficult for you to be very accurate about what is your thesis statement, what is your contribution, what I need to do here. So I would say, based on what your question is, how do you prevent, so you say, how can I prevent to explain the point that not really concentrate on my thesis? The only way you do that is when you have these broader blocks of debates in your own discussion, and then you can exclude them, you can throw them away because you know where you are. Does it make sense? Hello?
Yeah, it's really good. Thank you.
Yeah, you have to do that. This is very important. That question is so important because you have to filter what is important for you. But the only one you can do that is reading, is having this broad overview of the field. And mind you, one thing I learned in a hard way, I'm not telling you guys to read every single paper. There are papers you just scan. You go, you read very quickly. So now I know that that's about approaching inflation that way. Just put in that basket. Then another paper you're going to start reading, that's not going to complement me. Throw it. Don't be afraid of stop reading something that's not going to fit in your own argument. So you have to read as much as you can, but you have to do that quickly, right? We don't have 10 years to read the entire National Library. So you have to be able as well to select that readings. There are readings you're going to have to read from page 1 to the final page. There are some readings you're going to really scan. Some of them are going to read the abstract and you know what it is. So just put in that basket, right? I hope it helps. Do we have more? I think that was the last question, right? Well, at least here in the chat.
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Okay, so can I have questions?
Yes.
So in terms of the journals, so can you give us some tips and some advices to find the good journals to read the papers?
Sorry, I couldn't understand the last bit.
Can you give us some advice and tips to find the journals to read the papers?
To find this, sorry.
Journal.
To find
The journal, I mean.
Excuse me, I think he mean the journal.
Yeah. Oh, okay, the journal. Got it. Well, how we do that is it depends. For example, one database I like to start my research. I don't know where you guys are based, so it varies, but I think all the libraries would have access to that. Is something called the Web of Science. Let me see if I can find here. So the Web of Science, actually, if you go there, let me see if I can show. Are you guys with me here? If I do that, can you see? So, sorry, just hold there, because I think I'm gonna need that. So, let me just drop this. So if you have access to this through your university, what happens if that database, for example, let's just type inflation. Guys, I don't know why it's my problem with inflation. So if you do that, right, you're gonna, everything that's inflation, and here you can, for example, click that you just want, refine that you just want economics. We don't want you to know inflation in astronomy. So here we go, you refine that. So what happens here, if you see, you're gonna have, for example, world development, that's one journal. You have International Journal of Emerging Markets. So you're gonna have economic modeling. You know, you have different journals publishing about inflation. So the initial step is to know which are the journals that are publishing on the topic you want. And once, for example, I think that you can see as there is economic modeling. So we realize that two papers on this. So you can start unpacking if these papers in that journal are touching, are approaching inflation in a way you are also curious about discussing inflation. It may be that you don't want to do economic modeling when discussing inflation. It may be that you're more concerned about, a paper that is discussing inflation in a different approach. It probably would be world development or let's say other journal here, or empirical economics, for example. So you have, very often initially, like, of course now I've been a researcher for 15 years. I know the journals I want to look for my own topics, and because very often is the journals I also want to publish in them. So it's easier. But the first step when you're doing a master or undergrad or even your thesis, I always advise my students to come here, because here you get everything. And then you start polishing, or not polishing, then you start refining towards the journal that you have more familiarity, or you're more curious, or that approach the topic the way you want. That's a way to do. Another way to do, which I don't like much, is to have a conversation with your advisor, and your advisor would give you some of their journals that that person actually also research and publish. So you get already a sample of 3 or 4 journals where you're gonna looking for articles. Does it make sense? Does it help?
Can you change your screen to the website of your journal, if possible?
Oh, sorry, where? Here?
Yeah, and I think you need to change your screen to your website. So like the website that you are in, because
no one was following me.
Yeah.
Oh.
Excuse me, I think that because you're just showing the PowerPoints instead of the website.
Oh wait, so you guys didn't see the website I got it, I was showing?
Yeah, actually we can't.
Okay, let me change that. Can you see now?
Yes, we can see it now.
Oh, I'm very sorry. So let's do again. Stay there. We just, for some reason, not listening to you guys. So can everybody see? Can everybody see that Web of Science here?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. So that is sorry, let's just repeat that very quickly. So that is the database I was talking, that I think you should come first, because here, as I said, you have different journals. Can you see world development, economic modeling, Journal of Consumer Affairs, Review of Development Economics. So initially, come here and do your research here. There are different databases. I like Web of Science, but your university will have a different one. So you have to, basically what I want is you to come to a database that's gonna give you as many options as possible of articles published in whatever the topic you're looking for. For example, I type inflation, so it's giving me a lot of things on inflation. And here is where I select that I want just economics, if you look here. So yeah, so initially you come here, and then you can have a taste of which kind of journal has been publishing on inflation. So I think this is the best way to do. And then sometimes, as I mentioned before, you're going to start reading about inflation in economic modeling journal. We're going to think, oh, that's not really the approach I'm looking for. So you jump, you can, oh, well, let's read inflation in a review of development economics. Then it's like, okay, this is more that I like it. Then you start looking for more papers in that journal. So I think this is the best way. As I said, the plan B is you talk to your supervisor or your tutor or someone that's helping you, or someone you trust, a senior academic, that can advise you that, for example, when you're looking to inflation, the best journal to look is journal A, B, and C. So then you go direct to that journal. But do you need advice? There's no way that at the undergraduate level, even master level, you're gonna know which journal you should go, right? So initially, I advise you to have this big picture here, or ask for your advisor for some advice. Does it make sense? It's easy now. I'm very sorry. I thought you guys were seeing my odd screen. Does it make sense? Have I responded to your question?
Oh, yes, is it really clear? Thank you.
Perfect, perfect. Okay. Do you have any questions left, or should we probably a little bit tired, I guess?
I think we have one last question. So Daphne asked, in the literature review, should we mention about a finding closely related to our topic, but that is against our paper or contribution? Why we are not going to focus on addressing that or prove it wrong?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Yeah, so should we mention about a finding closely related to our topic, but against our paper? So, like for sure.
Okay, this is a question we talked a little bit before. I mean, it's a similar, if I answered a similar question, but correct me if it's not. Look, as I said before, your literature review, you should read as much as you can, right? You should read everything that, everything you come across. However, you can't really put all of this in your paper. You have to be very strategic. And I'm just finding literature review here. So, of course, it's interesting that you add some paper that somehow is challenging your own contribution. But I would stick, or I would probably focus more on papers that are giving you foundation for your own finding, for your own contribution. I'm feeling that I've been a bit repetitive, so I hope I'm addressing your question here. So I would focus on these papers first. And of course, as I said, the academic writing is about be aware of the other side of the debate. So, you have to give a taste here in your literature review that you're aware that there are other interpretations of the topic. But I wouldn't really do a literature review, for example, that's 50% papers that are I'm building my argument upon, and 50% of papers that are challenging my own argument. I wouldn't do that way. I would make sure that I show that I know my field, I know the debate, but here are the 3, 4, 5 papers, and very often more recent papers, right? In the last, 5, 10 years, that are really close to my own contribution. That's how I would do it. But it varies. There are academic journals that are more flexible regarding to that. When you're doing your thesis or your PhD thesis or your master, is a little bit different, because there you're gonna really have to show extensive literature review. So there you probably can add you add many more papers supporting your own contribution, and you also add papers challenging. Sometimes in your PhD, you can even divide your literature review in a way that shows that that the papers that are close to you, and then the papers that are criticized in your paper. I hope I addressed that question. Yeah, please ask again if it's not clear.
Yeah, and I think it should be the end of the workshop today. And thank you so much, Dr. Carolina, for joining us and giving us a wonderful presentation. And thank you everyone for coming. And yeah.
Thank you so much.
Excuse me, doctor. I have some distracted moment. So can you please go back to the slide where introduction and here some few tips. Thank you very much. I would like to see that slide again.
Okay,
just for 2 seconds. Thank you.
No, it's fine. Which one? Sorry.
The introduction. The tip for introductions.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Introduction. Here we go. Oh, here we go. That one.
I didn't see I didn't see the slide in the screen. Yeah, maybe you need to switch the screen.
Oh my gosh! I'm telling you, this Zoom is driving me mad. Let's see. Suppose, how do I share that now? Here you go. So I need to change the screen again. So you need this. Okay, here you go. Can you see now?
Oh yes, yeah, I got it.
Is that slide you're looking for?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else has any question, but for me, it's a great session today. Thank you very much, Doctor.
It was my pleasure. I hope that was helpful. And good luck with the writing. It's not easy, but eventually it happens.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And we will send the record of the meeting to your registered email. So yeah, and now I'm gonna go ahead and end the meeting. And bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.